Hey guys, welcome to the video. Salt here. Today we're going to be doing an additional supplement video for Nautilus. He's the one that we did the video on yesterday. So we have the top commenter of the last video, LazyFrame Prime, and the first commenter of the last video, Silver44. Then we have our recent supporters of Johnny, Eddie, and Lovio. Thank you so much for your support. Alright, so Nautilus here. Now, the build from yesterday is very good. It still stands, extremely good build. But I had made a comment during that video that I heard when I was reviewing the video. I heard my comment and I was like, I don't know if that's completely accurate. I think it requires testing. And the comment was that Nautilus is not going to be the best priming pet. There are pets that do that better, and so you don't really pick Nautilus as a priming pet. On testing, I came to the conclusion that that is in fact very wrong. Nautilus Prime is in fact the best melee primer in the entire game. He does actually dethrone the old best melee primer of Dirija by quite a bit, unfortunately. So Nautilus is the new king of melee priming. So I'm going to go into the build here, and we're going to explain why exactly. Well, the build is a little bit weird because I've done a few takes on this. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to explain why exactly how this works, I should say. So if we look at Coolant Leak here, if you remember from the Dirija build, Dirija uses Arc Coil in conjunction with Manifold Bond to do his melee priming. Dirija can also use Coolant Leak in conjunction with Manifold Bond to do his melee priming. The problem with Coolant Leak when it comes to Dirija is that Arc Coil is just much more consistent. Arc Coil will go off consistently every second, whereas Coolant Leak could technically go off every second if you get enough kills quick enough. However, more often than not on Dirija, you're looking at Coolant Leak being like a once every 3 to 4 second proc, which is not as good as Arc Coil going off every second. So on Dirija, you're using Arc Coil, Manifold Bond, and you can still use Coolant Leak on Dirija, but it's just more to add a cold proc. It's not really to do the whole mechanic that we're wanting to do. Well, on Nautilus, Coolant Leak acts a little bit more consistently, and it's because Nautilus has the grouping tool of Cordon, and that makes enemies, of course, grouped up. And so you're killing more of them quicker that have all of these statuses, which allows Coolant Leak to more often kind of machine gun cast like Arc Coil would. It doesn't always. You're still sometimes looking at Coolant Leak as like a 2 or 3 second cooldown instead of like a 1 second spammer. But it's more consistent, and it will sometimes go off like every second. Okay, so I wanted to do testing comparing Nautilus Prime to Dirija because I didn't want to just assume that one was better than the other. And so to do this testing, I needed to do this in like a kind of a sterile environment. I wanted to remove any kind of variables that could happen. And so I did 3 runs on Dirija and I did 3 runs on Nautilus. And during these runs, I removed variables. So what I removed for both builds, because both builds are very, very similar. So Dirija is basically Arc Coil and Manifold Bond, and Nautilus is Cordon and Manifold Bond. And then you use Coolant Leak. Well, I should say Coolant Leak and Manifold Bond, and then you use Cordon to group enemies up. So very similar builds. The difference is on testing for both builds, I removed Momentous Bond because there's too many variables with this. You can get very lucky and get like every status in the game, or you can get unlucky and get no statuses. So I didn't like that variable when I did testing. Of course, when you're not testing, you should use Momentous Bond because it's very powerful. But on testing, there's too many variables. And I also removed Tenacious Bond because I just didn't want an extra 1.2 crit damage while I was testing. One of the reasons we're testing this is because of condition overload. So to get a proper test, you want your melee weapon to do a crap load of damage when you are priming enemies, and you want it to do almost no damage when you're not priming enemies. And so you want most of your damage to come from condition overload. And so I didn't want this 1.2 crit damage just sitting on it for some reason. So we took that off for testing. on both builds, both the Dirija and the Nautilus. Okay, now if we look at the Burst Laser Prime, we used the exact same weapon, Burst Laser Prime, for both of them. This is going to apply 6 statuses when he does his little primer, whether that's arc coil or coolant leak. And we've chosen to go with viral, heat, and radiation for the testing for both builds. For the melee weapon, we chose the Nakana Prime for no particular reason. There probably would have been better weapons to do the testing with, but that's okay. We chose Nakana Prime. And for the build for the Nakana Prime, again, we are removing any kind of things that have too many variables. So the first thing I wanted to remove was melee influence, because that is just too much variable. There's too much craziness going on with that. So we removed melee influence. We're never heavy attacking because heavy attacks are too random. And so we removed our Tennokai mod. Condition overload, of course, this is basically what we're testing. So this has to be on. For the critical chance, I wanted the critical chance to be as close to 100% as I possibly could. And to achieve that, we're just using Blood Rush for critical chance. This gets our critical chance to just a little bit over 100% when it's at full 12 times combo, which we're going to consistently be at all the time. And so we're just a little bit over 100%, which means that every single whack is going to be a yellow crit with a very, very small chance that it's going to be an orange. So most of the whacks are going to be a yellow crit, which is pretty consistent. I also added 1 crit damage mod just because you're going to have crit damage on your melee weapons. You're probably going to have way more crit damage than just 1 Organ Shatter mod, but just to kind of limit it a little bit, I just put 1 crit damage mod. For the attack speed mod, I use Primed Fury, just because Berserker Fury has a little bit of variables. You have to get like kills, and I probably could have used Berserker Fury. It's not really too hard to keep that up at max, but I just use Primed Fury just because it is a consistent 55 attack speed. And that was pretty much the build for the Nakana Prime. Now, the Nakana has, well, it's a positive, but on testing, it's actually a negative. So on testing, it has a very, very high slash weighting. The base puncture and base impact, I believe, are 9.9, whereas the slash is 178. And so to actually nerf the Nakana's slash, I actually went ahead and I added impact mods. I added Primed Heavy Trauma for impact, and I added Collision Force for impact, and I also added Augur Strike for puncture. And if I had enough capacity, I would actually add the other puncture mod as well. And so these 3 mods actually act to nerf the weapons element of slash. So with a status chance, 1 out of 4 hits would normally have been a slash. It's still probably more often than not going to still be a slash, but it's going to be less often than it was previously because we've nerfed the weapon with these 3 mods. Because again, we want our elements on testing to be coming from condition overload with the manifold bond coolant leak combo. We don't really want the elements to be coming from here. Well, as well as element damage, and that's really why the slash was an issue. And that's probably why I could have picked a better weapon than the Nakana, because the Nakana is so ridiculously slash heavy. But I nerfed it a bit by adding these here. So that's the weapon we chose to do the testing with. This is the build. We did this testing with an Inaros with no mods on him that did anything to affect weapon performance. And we did it with the Naramon Focus School to decrease the decay on our melee, so we just always sat at 12 times combo. Okay. So now that I've explained the testing, let me bring up our little slide that we have here. So we did Dirija versus Nautilus Prime. These are the kill counts for 5-minute runs, Steel Path, Void, Mott. So Dirija got 230 kills, 259 kills, and 240 kills. All pretty consistent numbers. And Nautilus Prime in its 3 runs got 292, 367, and 370 in its 3 runs. So you can see, like, Nautilus Prime pretty easily beat out Dirija by a pretty sizable amount. I mean, even its lowest value at 292 is still higher, much higher than even Dirija's highest value of 259. Also noting that in every one of these runs, Dirija and Nautilus Prime went down 1 time each in every 5-minute run. And in fact, on one of Nautilus's runs, on the 367 kill run, Nautilus actually went down twice. So in that 367 kill run, there was actually a period of 50 seconds of downtime on Nautilus, and it still beat out Dirija. So just note that, you know, anytime your pet goes down, it's going to be a 25-second downtime. Of course, Momentous Bond can decrease that, but we took off Momentous Bond. So, yeah, so even during that 367 kill run, he went down twice, which is 50 seconds of downtime, and it still beat Dirija's runs. So we can kind of conclusively say that Nautilus Prime is the new best melee primer in the game. All right, let me go back to regular gameplay here. I believe Dirija still serves a purpose if you're using a Warframe that has a natural grouping ability. Like, you know, not a subsume, because you wouldn't want to subsume a grouping ability on, because then you might as well just use Nautilus. But if your Warframe has a natural grouping ability, then Dirija is still pretty damn good. It probably might still be better than Nautilus, because Arc Coil is going to go off more consistently. But if your Warframe doesn't have a natural grouping ability, Nautilus does pretty consistently poop all over Dirija. Okay, so let's go over the Nautilus Prime build here. Let's put on those mods that we took off that were a bit too inconsistent for the testing. Okay, so Nautilus Prime. We're going to start with 2 survivability mods. We have Enhanced Vitality and Calculated Redirection. This is going to help to keep your dude up more often, so less periods of downtime. Now, Enhanced Vitality is not good if you're going to do level cap. If you're going to do level cap, you should not use Enhanced Vitality, and you should use Calculated Redirection and Accelerated Deflection. So Calculated Redirection will increase your shield gate on your pet to 2.5, which I believe is the max there, yep. And Accelerated Deflection is going to increase the shield recharge on him. So no matter how well you think your pet is built, he's still going to go down, though. So these survivability mods are basically just stalling until he does go down. And then you have things like Prime to Regen that gets him back up quicker. So level cap, definitely use this setup. But non-level cap, the health one is still quite good. So I'm going to go back to my health and redirection, because I mostly do non-level cap. Okay, this is the flex slot right here. I'm going to skip this for now. We'll go over at the end what possibly could go into this slot right here. We have Cordon is going to be the grouping tool. Nautilus forces enemies within 30 meters of the target into clusters for easier targeting, cooldown 15 seconds. I'm going to say kind of the same spiel I said yesterday, so you could always skip ahead like 30 seconds if you want. So Cordon, how it works, and is what's not said on the mod here, is that it picks an enemy 30 meters away, then it creates a pull zone 5 meters from you, between you and that enemy that it picked. So the pull zone is going to be 5 meters from you. Then it pulls enemies 30 meters from you into that pull zone up to 15 meters. So it pulls enemies 30 meters away, but it only pulls them 15 meters. Now, any kind of speed or slow modifiers can affect that 15 meters of pull. So if you're speeding enemies up, they can actually go more than 15 meters. And if you're slowing them down, they'll go less than 15 meters. So you probably don't want to be using a slow when you're using Cordon, because it's going to be less effective on pulling enemies. But any kind of speed is actually going to be more effective. So like you either run this without any kind of a speed modifier, or you run it with speed, just not slow. Slow is going to kind of nerf Cordon a bit. We use Coolant Leak, unleashes a 10-meter radial blast of cold when multiple enemies are nearby, adds 3 stacks, 10-second cooldown. So this is what we're going to be using in conjunction with Manifold Bond to apply statuses to everything around us. So if we read Manifold Bond here, companion preset mods apply status effects from companion weapons, killing enemies with 3 or more unique status effects, reduces companion ability cooldown by 3 seconds. So again, this has a 10-second cooldown, but if you use this with Manifold Bond, you know, that bottom part there, killing enemies with 3 or more unique status effects, reduces cooldown by 3 seconds. This could go down to like a 1-second cooldown, and it could technically be machine gun casting as quick as Arc Coil normally does. And Cordon helps that, because it pulls enemies in, and so you're killing a lot of enemies with statuses easily, instead of having to chase them down like you would on Dirija. Okay, and then if we read Manifold Bond, the top part here, I already read it, but let's read a little bit more in detail. Companion preset mods apply status effects from companion weapons. So you have to be making sure that your companion weapon is built out for like every friggin' status that you could possibly put on it. Now I'm going to skip ahead to our weapon that we've chose, because this is very important. And it's why we picked Burst Laser Prime, because Burst Laser Prime is normally a dookie weapon that like no one would ever pick. Why the hell did I pick Burst Laser Prime? Well, it's because it has full IPS, which is Impact, Puncture, Slash. It's like, you know, normally you would think of like the strongest weapon in the game, the Verglas. Well, the Verglas only has one status. So like for a primer, it's not very good. So you want to pick a weapon that has full IPS, Impact, Puncture, Slash. Then we're going to add more elements on top of it, but we're also going to be putting on Tenacious Bond, which requires your weapon to have more than a 50% critical chance. So you don't have to use Burst Laser Prime, but there are other weapons that have full IPS. Just make sure that they can also get to over 50% critical chance. So like I think the Sweeper Prime has full IPS, but it can't get to over 50% critical chance. So like keep that in mind. Just because it has full IPS doesn't mean it's like the weapon to choose. It has to have full IPS and get to over 50% critical chance. So the Burst Laser Prime does that, and I think there's like 2 or 3 other weapons that do that. So it doesn't have to be the Burst Laser Prime. Okay. So Burst Laser Prime, full IPS, Impact, Puncture, Slash. We're also going for Viral, Heat, and Radiation. The other thing you can do is Magnetic, Toxic, and Radiation is fine too. And that's going to be giving us 6 statuses that anytime he does his little coolant leak thing, he's going to be applying to everything around him. And keep in mind, coolant leak is also a cold proc, so that's 7 statuses. All right, so 7 statuses. Now we're going to go to Momentous Bond, which is going to add even more statuses. So killing Exodus enemies grants 120% bonus of a random element damage to your companion for 30 seconds and reduces companion recovery by 18 seconds. Both of those effects are pretty nice. So the first one is that you get a random element. Sometimes you're going to get unlucky and you're going to get an element that you already have on your Sentinel weapon, or like maybe it's already like a cold that you already are producing from coolant leak. But other times you're going to get the statuses that you don't have anywhere, and so you have the potential to produce all the statuses in the game. Well, except for the weird ones like Microwave. Okay, Tenacious Bond. Headshot kills reduce companion recovery timer by 3 seconds. This doesn't matter too much because it's a melee build, so we're not really going to be doing those headshot kills. If the companion's critical chance is over 50%, then you gain 1.2 times final critical damage multiplier. So, very powerful. It's just that your companion weapon has to have over 50% critical chance. Like I was saying, just make sure you're picking a weapon that can easily achieve over 50% critical chance. Primed regen Sentinel recovery time reduced by 35 seconds. So instead of a 60-second recovery, it's 25-second recovery, and he revives with 10 seconds of invulnerability. This is very powerful. No matter how well you think your pet is built for survivability, he's still going to go down, and that's where primed regen comes in. And then this, in conjunction with Momentous Bond, you know, his downtime could technically only be like 10-ish seconds instead of like the full 25 seconds. All right, and then we have Vacuum. This is going to scoop and gather our loot up for us. So what could go into this flex slot here? Well, there's a few options. I mean, honestly, you can use whatever you want. If any of the options that I'm saying right here you don't like, you can use whatever you want here. But let's think about it here. What do we got? We got Primed Animal Instincts is the first thing I have written down. Loot Radar and Enemy Radar. I love Primed Animal Instincts, and so a lot of times I'll probably use this thing. It's not technically increasing your DPS. It's really just more of a utility tool, and so some people don't like it. But I would argue that being able to see enemies further away on your map sometimes could increase your DPS because you know where to go for like the next pack of enemies. But for a melee build, because you're like more close range, maybe you don't really need to see them that far out. So like that's also an argument to be made against Primed Animal Instinct. So it's really up to you. It's a utility pick. The next option I have written down is Mystic Bond. Mystic Bond's really powerful. After your companion uses abilities with cooldowns 5 times, you may cast a Warframe ability without expending energy. So because of Manifold Bond, he's going to be kind of machine gun casting Cordon and Coolant Leak. That will let you cast a free Warframe ability pretty much like every 5 seconds, which is very, very powerful, really good on energy conservation. However, Mystic Bond is very bad if you are a Shield Gator. So if you're a Shield Gator, do not use Mystic Bond. And it's because Shield Gating Warframes typically will use Augur mods or Brief Respite, or both, to give them shields back when they spend energy. Well, this obviously makes your abilities free, and so you're not spending energy, so you're not getting shields back. So for Shield Gator, don't use Mystic Bond. Anyone else, though, really powerful tool to be in the flex slot here. The other one I have written down, I don't know for sure if this works, so let me know in the comments if you know if this works or not. So Synth Deconstruct, enemies injured by your companion have a 25% chance to drop a health orb when killed. Coolant Leak, I don't know if this technically damages enemies. And I don't know if the precepts for Manifold Bond would count towards this. Maybe. I mean, this probably works. This does probably work. I'm just not 100% sure on this. I didn't do the testing stuff. It probably works. So Synth Deconstruct would combo incredibly well if you're using the Warframe mod Equilibrium. If you're not using Equilibrium, you probably don't need Synth Deconstruct, but it combos extremely well with Equilibrium. So I'm pretty sure it works. I think even like the Coolant Leak putting on like procs, because the procs have heat that does damage, I think it still technically would work with Synth Deconstruct. So those are some options for that flex slot there. Again, if you didn't like any of the options I gave, you could always pick something else too. Oh, you know, another one that I didn't say was Guardian. Guardian's always powerful, and it's an easy mod to get to. It's a brown mod. Boosts owner shields by 100% when it runs out. So really good at saving your butt. Of course, not every Warframe is going to need their butt saved, though. So if you don't need your butt saved, you don't need to use Guardian. But if you want some extra survivability, Guardian's really powerful. So that is how you build out Nautilus for a melee primer. This is also probably a pretty good primer if you're like using a shotgun or a close range weapon that is considered a multiplicative ranged weapon. And for that, you need to understand to use the Google website condition overload mechanic. So you go on Google, you just type in condition overload mechanic, not condition overload, because if you type in condition overload, it's just going to bring up the mod, but condition overload mechanics. And you scroll about halfway down the site, and then it's going to give you a big list of ranged weapons that are multiplicative condition overload. So for any of those weapons, this could also be quite a good build. Well, any of those weapons that are close range, right? Like probably like shotguns or like flamethrowers, things like that. So that's how to build out this Nautilus. The Nautilus general build that we did yesterday is still quite good. It's just that for a melee priming build, this is going to be the better one. Okay, we're going to go over Burst Laser Prime and how to build this out. So again, you don't have to pick Burst Laser Prime. Just make sure it is a weapon that has full IPS and can get over 50% critical chance. Okay. So you can either choose viral, heat, or radiation. Or viral, heat, and radiation. Or magnetic, toxic, and radiation. All right, both are good setups. You always want to pick the most powerful element, which is either going to be viral or magnetic. So for this setup here, it doesn't matter whether you use the 6060s or the 90s. I use the 6060s because I believe they're a lower capacity, but it doesn't really matter. Now, the only issue with heat is that if your Warframe is already producing heat damage through some kind of means, if maybe like you're doing a melee ember, or if you're using thermal sunder, or if you're using, I'm trying to like think of like other heat subsumes. But if you're using some kind of a Warframe that is doing heat damage and heat dots, setting your Burst Laser Prime on your pet up for heat could be bad. And it's because the Manifold Bond and the precepts may be turning your crazy dots that are doing like crazy damage from your Warframe into doing like 1 damage ticks instead, because these are just being applied through precepts. So if you're using a fire Warframe, don't use viral heat radiation, use magnetic toxic radiation instead. But for anyone else, I do like the viral heat radiation a bit better than magnetic. Magnetic does start pulling its weight a lot more the further you go on its steel path, though, because there's going to be Eximuses like all over the friggin' place. So, yeah, those are what you pick for the elements here. Then you use Creeping Bullseye. This is going to increase that critical chance over 50%. That is important to activate Tenacious Bond. Then we're going to be using Karna Stinger. The first part of Karna Stinger doesn't actually affect the build whatsoever. So, the slash and status chance don't matter. It might as well be blank. But the bottom part does matter. Killing an enemy with a heavy attack reduces enemy accuracy against Warframes by 10% and grants immunity to status effects for 2 seconds. So the reason I have 2 ticks is because I have one of these Karnas mods on my Nautilus, but normally you would just have the 1 tick, which is a 10% reduced accuracy and 2 seconds of status immunity. Now with Tennokai, you're going to be heavy attacking all the time, so you'll actually have status immunity and reduced enemy accuracy like pretty damn often, which is really powerful. That's why Karnas Stinger goes on the build here. Now we have 2 mod slots to play with, and there are 2 sets of options for these slots. Let's go over probably the most powerful set, but this is really going to be dependent if you're a Shield Gator or not, and it's going to be the Augur set. So we go Augur Pack and Augur Seeker, and again, the top part does not actually affect the build, so Augur Pack's 90% damage does not affect the build, and Augur Seeker's status duration does not affect the build, because status duration, or statuses applied through Manifold Bond, like through the precepts in Manifold Bond, don't get affected by status duration on your Sentinel weapon, unfortunately. So the status duration and the damage here does not matter whatsoever. The only thing that matters is the bottom part, which is 80% energy spent on abilities is converted to shields. That's really good. A lot of shield gating builds like really struggle to be like finding ways to use Augur mods, and you could just have an Augur mod on your Sentinel weapon and it works for your Warframe, which is pretty friggin' crazy. And you get 2 of them here. So you get Augur Pack and Augur Seeker to get the 2 of the Augur sets. And of course, if you still want to use Augur mods on your Warframe itself, then you'd have 3 ticks of the Augur set, or maybe even 4, who knows. So this is one really good setup here for these 2 slots. If you're not using a shield gating Warframe, like the Augur set is a little bit less impressive because, you know, a little bit of energy here and there is not as good. But for shield gators, really, really powerful. All right, the other one to use would be the weird Deimos ones. Let me just type in set. Set, okay. So Jugular Spines and Saxum Spittle. So we have all 3 weird Deimos ones on. The reason I think Karnas Stinger is an auto-include is because it's just, like, status immunity and reduced enemy accuracy is really friggin' powerful. The other ones are still pretty good, but they're less powerful, I think, than this effect is. So Saxum Spittle. Again, the top part doesn't get affected whatsoever. Lifted enemies explode on death, dealing 10% enemy max health as impact damage in a 4-meter radius, I believe that's going to be. Again, I have one of these on my Nautilus for some reason. So the lifted status is hard to produce normally, but actually in melee it's not. Melee, when you do a slam, heavy slam, they are lifted, and so you'll actually get a lot of value on this on melee builds. And so a lot of times people will be lifted around you, and so you can get some just extra like explosive damage happening through Saxum Spittle. So pretty good. Pretty good, especially if you didn't need that Augur mod set. Like Saxum Spittle actually at least gives you some value. Jugular Spines. This one is probably the least of value out of all the Deimos ones, but it still does something. So again, the top part doesn't actually affect your weapon whatsoever. So slam attacks manifest tendrils to lash enemies within 6 meters. I think that might be lower because I have one of these mods on my Nautilus. Stunning them for 2 seconds and dealing 50 puncture damage. This one's okay. You know, you get some stuns here and there, some crowd control. Probably the least useful out of all 3 of these. But if you don't need the Augur sets, then why not? You at least get some kind of function out of it here. So with these 2 slots here, you either go with the other 2 Deimos mods or you go with the Augur set. So just consider that. That's how you build out Burst Laser Prime there. So we've explained how to build out Nautilus Prime. We went over the testing and what I did for testing. We explained Burst Laser Prime. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think the additional supplement build for Nautilus Prime as a melee primer is complete. So yeah. So I hope you guys liked the video. If you liked it, consider giving it a like. If you haven't subbed yet, consider subbing or tell me what I can do to earn your sub. And I hope you guys have an amazing day. All right, bye.